A grim milestone in 2021, the deadliest year on record for drug poisonings.
The opioid crisis in Alberta is killing more people than it ever has.
I'm again committing that Alberta will not go down that path. There is no compassion in leaving people to suffer in the throes of addiction. We will not sacrifice our communities or give up on those suffering from addiction.
Danielle Smith has got to get off her ass, and she's got to change the Mental Health Act and the Housing First Act immediately. That way the recovery model will work.
Alberta is considering introducing a bill that could force drug users into treatment against their will.
You know, in British Columbia, people are putting second mortgages on their homes to pay for treatment upwards of, $30,000 a month.
Safe supply was introduced before there was any research indicating that it was either safe or effective.
So what do you think of the Alberta government's approach, this recovery model approach? Because they're kind of doing something that isn't being done around the country.
Fuck the government. How about that?
Over the last 10 years, the opioid overdose crisis has gripped Canada. It has made its way and pillaged through cities across the country. There's pretty much not a city in Canada that has not been deeply affected by the opioid overdose crisis. Alberta and British Columbia have been the two provinces where the majority of overdose deaths have taken place. British Columbia, of course, is known around the world for being devastated by the opioid overdose crisis, but Alberta as well has had really rough numbers. Over the past few years, the Alberta government has decided to break away from the rest of the country and approach this crisis through a different lens. Alberta has decided that instead of harm reduction and safe supply, their model is going to be recovery-oriented.
This is the challenge facing our country and our communities because of policies that tolerate and even facilitate addiction. I'm again committing that Alberta will not go down that path. There is no compassion in leaving people to suffer in the throes of addiction. We will not sacrifice our communities or give up on those suffering from addiction.
A whole of government and whole of society approach to try to recover addicts, to try to bring them back from the streets, put them in beds, and give them a new chance at life. It's called the Alberta Recovery Model, and I'm here in Calgary to figure out if it is working. And I want to ask addiction specialists if it's working. I want to speak to Frontline journalists who have been reporting on this crisis if it has been working. And of course, what good is a video like this if we're not speaking to the people who are themselves battling this crisis, who are trying to get clean, who are trying to bring themselves back from a perilous situation. So we're going to try to speak to people on the streets who are struggling with the drug addiction if they think the Alberta Recovery Model will work for them. Later on, I'm going to be speaking to the people who run a site called Last Door Recovery, one of Alberta's newest addiction recovery facilities. I want to know what makes their program different from the programs that we've seen all across the country. What does the Alberta Recovery Model look like in practice? That's what we're here to figure out.
The approach toward emphasizing recovery and emphasizing understanding recovery in as having a sort of a community base, that it resides in sort of social groups. This is a long-standing movement in Canada and around the world, and it goes back to the deinstitutionalization, that era of closing large institutions, and that was done, and it was done in the 70s and in the 80s when I entered the field. It was done on the basis of knowledge even then.
I was able to catch up with Dr. Julian Somers, a professor of health sciences at Simon Fraser University and an addictions recovery doctor in Vancouver. He had previously advised the Alberta government on the Alberta Recovery Model. So he is absolutely an expert in this field and someone who has deep insights into the way the Alberta model works and how that differs from the model that we see in British Columbia. Can you explain to us, as someone who is at the table, what the Alberta Recovery Model is?
Well, I'll qualify that. I was one of a number of people invited to provide input. I did have that privilege, though, of serving in some of the I suppose advisory committees, and the main differentiator of what's referred to as the Alberta model is that it is based on a framework It's usually used by governments, but a framework for addressing addiction that's known as a recovery-oriented system of care. Now, other places have also introduced this framework, but in each location, it's going to take on a slightly different flavor, and that's because the resources that are available, let's say from state to state, province to province, country to country, will vary, but maybe even more important, the nature of the challenges that are mobilizing this kind of government-wide response will also vary. The types of substances involved, the types of mental illnesses that are regarded as being at a kind of a crisis level. Unfortunately, these reforms are often crisis-driven. And so, but the key thing is that it's an all-of-government approach. I think that, for starters, is a very important point of emphasis. So safe supply was introduced before there was any research indicating that it was either safe or effective. And to many people, it seemed a bit, I was incredulous. I'll say that someone was going to advocate for providing drugs, opioids, from heroin to fentanyl, with methamphetamines, with benzodiazepines, with other drugs to people who are living homeless, socially isolated, with untreated mental illness symptoms, unemployed. And I'm listing these things because all of those are risk factors for addiction. If we can begin working with someone on opportunities to establish healthy housing, responsibilities to retain that healthy housing, a path leading back to employment, a path leading to reconnection with one's kids. Many of the people who are living rough and with addictions have kids. Then we're pursuing this path toward returning to citizenship, that definition of recovery. And so it seemed like, why would anybody be recommending that we ignore all those things? Because you don't hear those mentioned by advocates for safe supply. And why would we even be introducing this term anyway, safe supply, when, as I said, there was no evidence indicating either safety or effectiveness? The risk is that we're going to be adding to the drug supply, not offsetting it, because the people that we're concerned about, many of them, are living in poverty. Let me add one more point specific to Alberta, and that is we do need to intervene involuntarily from time to time for people's own good. And all places are already doing that. In BC, the numbers of people who are being hospitalized against their will for addiction has been going up dramatically. The people who are incarcerated with addictions has also been going up in BC. So we don't have the luxury of thinking about whether or not to involuntarily intervene. We are already. What Alberta has done is implement services and resources for people that can reasonably be expected to help them reduce their risk and approach recovery. And they did that prior to implementing their formal approach to involuntarily intervening.
Core to the Alberta Recovery Model is the creation and implementation of Alberta Recovery Communities, like this one here in Calgary. The Calgary Recovery Community, operated by Last Door Recovery, was opened by Premier Danielle Smith just 2 weeks ago, and it is already serving clients. This is all part of Alberta's $350 million plan to build 11 facilities. This facility is Alberta's fourth. I sat down with Last Door Recovery's program director, Ryan Gilfillan, to learn more about this facility and the Alberta Recovery Model.
I think one of the differences is it's completely government funded. So the Alberta government has deleted user fees attached to programming, but the caveat to that is they've made it long-term treatment. And so instead of we're moving away from these 30 days, 45 days to a more open-ended program. So clients can come to us and stay up to a year. And so they're not covering portions of that cost. And in some other provinces, there is funding, but then the user has to cover a fee too. It might be like $40 a day. So that's been completely deleted here. And they also have opened up that timeline from the acute, like short-term model where you're addressing like symptoms and stabilization into a more long-term, like building recovery capital wellness approach.
So when people talk about the Alberta Recovery Model, and they use that to differentiate Alberta's approach from, say, British Columbia or from Ontario, what does that look like? I mean, what does the Alberta Recovery Model look like in practice?
Well, I can tell you from, opening the Calgary Recovery Community, this is it's not the only piece, but a key piece to what they were doing was they wanted to open up thousands of beds so that there's treatment on demand. And so their initiative was to open up recovery communities. And so we're the fourth one to come online. Lakeview came online last summer. Red Deer was before that. And then also Lethbridge as well. And currently right now there's, several more that should be coming online in like the next year or two. So they're creating the capacity so that when someone, starts moving into the recovery process, when they call to get a bed somewhere, there's going to be a bed instead of there being like long wait lists and then people have to figure out like, how do I get funding? Where do I go to get funding? All of those types of things. Or, in British Columbia, people are putting second mortgages on their homes to pay for treatment upwards of, $30,000 a month. And so if you don't have that funding, what do? You end up sitting on a wait list for, 6 to 9 months trying to get a bed somewhere. And so right now Alberta is building that capacity, and that's just one piece. There's the navigation centers that have opened up in Edmonton and Calgary as well, where people can go and get ID, they can do their taxes, they can see a recovery coach, they can get connections and get referrals to detox, treatment centers, shelters, like housing, all of those things, right?
Well, first of all, have you seen positive success so far with the other recovery communities that have been built? I mean, what are you seeing as early results?
Yeah, I mean, on the Alberta website, I think it's really cool that they do this. They show a lot of different stats. And I know, in the last 2 years since a lot of these recovery communities have come online, but also like the model as it started coming into play, you're seeing a reduction in overdose deaths. There's like almost, a zero in prescription medication related deaths. Methamphetamine deaths have gone down. Like you're seeing a decline in all of these areas. Whether to say that's like just because treatment beds have been created, I think it's because of the whole approach altogether, and treatment is just a part to play in that. But I've also got to tour all the other recovery communities, and we've worked very closely together. Like even when Calgary Recovery Community was coming online, and I visited them and I see, it in the clients that are there and the ones that are graduating and returning back to community. We, in the greater recovery community here in Calgary, I've seen a lot of alumni from these programs that are like active in the community. And so for me, that's just like visual evidence that it's working, but the stats also on the Alberta website show that there's an improvement as well, right?
Just a little bit about yourself. How did you get into this? What's your background?
Yeah, your story? For sure. Last Door Recovery Society saved my life. So I ended up as a client at Last Door in 2014. I had no plans on becoming a counselor. I actually was doing my electrical apprenticeship. And Last Door introduced me to a life of recovery. And I think the most important thing is they believed in me. Like that I didn't have to have a low standard in my life. Like they pushed me to have dreams and goals. And a year after I was in recovery, I decided to volunteer there and start working there. And then I went to school and became a counselor. And I've worked with Last Door, pretty much the last 10 years. I left briefly to open up my own program in BC, which focused on transitional living for people coming out of treatment. And then, Last Door, they offered me to come out here and be a part of this. And they're like a family to me. So, for me, this journey is personal. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And so I, have once sat in a chair in treatment. And so I kind of have that feeling of what worked for me and what that experience was like. And so, I love what I do.
The team at Last Door Recovery also agreed to provide me with a brief tour of the facility.
Yeah, so everything you see on the interior of the building has been redone.
And what was this building before?
It was a seniors lodge.
I see.
That closed right before COVID. Yeah.
So this is a brand new facility, and these are all brand new renovated rooms?
Yeah. I'll turn the light up a bit, so.
Great. And what are some of the basic rules here that differentiate this place from another recovery facility or another rehab facility?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's rules that really differentiate us from other places. A lot of, treatment centers share very common kind of practices. For us, it's just based on phases. So as you move through the phases, the rules change a little bit. You have a bit more autonomy in what you do and more privileges, let's say that.
Right.
And so ours is very broken out into those phases.
Interesting, okay.
And then they all have a half bath here. Let's take this out of the way so you can.
Great.
So this is the gym.
Oh, nice.
Which our clients absolutely love this space.
This is a great gym,
Yeah.
Wow. And so for people that don't know Calgary, this is not exactly in downtown. It's a bit outside of downtown.
Correct.
It kind of feels like it's in its own bubble in a way. Was that intentional, location-wise?
It was intentional to be within like a suburban community. Yeah. Because we want the guys to feel like they're part of community and they're not just like hidden away from the world. And so our guys are going to mutual aid support groups in community because they need to learn how to be in community, right? And so it's nice because we have distance from downtown, but we still feel like we're around, right?
Yeah.
Games room for the guys.
Oh, nice.
So popcorn machine, chess.
Nice. Just sort of a place to relax and hang out and have some fun. Nice.
We want to inspire people. We don't want them to come to treatment and be like, oh, this sucks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. So the place just opened, right? It's been a few weeks.
Yeah, August 7th, we intaked our first 2 clients.
Okay, so how many clients do you have right now?
11.
All right.
Yeah.
And it goes up to?
74.
74, yeah. Okay, great. When someone gets a treatment bed, that's not just simply a bed. When someone reads that, what does that fully mean?
No, that's everything from housing, food, counseling, different psychoeducational groups, rec, mentorship, all of that kind of stuff's included, yeah.
All right, so when you read about this facility having 74 beds, that's what that means. It's not just 74 people and then a handful are getting extra services.
No, it's the whole meal deal. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the data. What you're looking at comes from the Alberta government. In 2022, Alberta removed all user fees for publicly funded addiction recovery services. 2023 was a record year in Alberta for opioid drug poisoning deaths. However, 2024 saw a significant decrease in deaths. The latest data for 2025, from January to May, shows that 2025 is on pace to have at least the same number of opioid-related deaths in the province as in 2024. So it's too early to tell if 2025 will be lower than 2024, but if it is, it would be the first time that opioid deaths have decreased for 2 consecutive years in the province in at least a decade. When comparing Alberta's data to British Columbia, it's hard to point out major differences. Both provinces are seeing lower drug deaths in 2025 compared to 2023. British Columbia's data, however, does not isolate opioids and includes drug deaths involving stimulants like cocaine. Drug deaths are going down in Alberta and in British Columbia. But can you attribute that to the Alberta Recovery Model?
So behind me is the Calgary Drop-In Center, a very large homeless shelter here in the downtown East Village of Calgary. You can also see behind me a large number of people who are homeless, presumably on the street, waiting around or receiving services. I'm gonna head over there, see if I can talk to anybody about their experiences with the Alberta recovery system, if they've used it, if they know anybody that's gone through with it, and if they think that Alberta's approach to drug addiction and homelessness has shown any positive signs over the past few years. You were just telling me about the services in Alberta that you find it's good, but there are some things that you think could be improved.
When they ban people from shelters, they don't have enough sympathy about taking them back and giving them forgiveness for what they've done if they prove that they have changed and take responsibility for their actions for getting, because I'm one of these guys, right? I'm barred from there. But
sorry, ma'am, I don't.
DI, I stay at the Alpha House, and poor Alpha House only has 1 meal a day.
Recovery doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
You can do the 12 steps. It doesn't mean fuck all, because eventually you're gonna relapse and you're gonna fucking, you're just gonna get back to the shit. Okay? Because you love what you love. You can't tell yourself you don't love it, because when you do the 12 steps and you ask yourself when you're on the 7th step if you're gonna give yourself to God, you're lying when you say you do. So,
do you think that the people that you know that are using drugs, that are trying, do you think they want to recover?
No, because that's very dismissive. Because people, when they say they want to recover, they're just lying to you and they're lying to themselves. It's an open line. Okay? It's a fallacy.
So what do you think of the Alberta government's approach, this recovery model approach? Because they're kind of doing something that isn't being done around the country.
Fuck the government. How about that?
What do you think about the Alberta government's recovery model?
Zero, nothing response.
You think that it's working so far?
It sucks.
Why is that?
Because there is no recovery.
So the recovery facilities that are being built that we've seen in the news, the one in Calgary, there's a few that, in your experience, they're not actually working?
No, not at all. There's no funding, there's no proper anything. I mean, where's the funding going to? It's going into the government's pockets anyway, right? So what's the point?
Have you seen the situation get worse over the past few years?
Yes.
Recently?
Yes.
And would you attribute that to the recovery model?
I don't know what this is all about. The point is, this is not working.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
The recovery model, unfortunately, the reason why it's failing isn't because of its model, but because of the legislations that behind it. And that's the Mental Health Act and the Housing First Act. These models are the things that are behind it. So that's why the recovery model doesn't work. Say, for instance, I've been a client at the DI for 4 years. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. I don't do crime, and I get barred constantly. There isn't a reason for it. People who do the things that the legislation is based off of don't get bothered, and that's suicidal behavior, killing themselves with alcohol and drugs, and not even looking for housing. The teams here will bust their ass and find them a place because they know they're gonna die right away. They'll be replacing them right away. It's a cash cow. We're all trafficked here. Every place we go for any kind of service, whether it be recovery based or not, gets paid when we walk through that door. They don't want to house us because they're gonna lose their money. The NGOs are gonna lose their cash cow. Danielle Smith has got to get off her ass, and she's got to change the Mental Health Act and the Housing First Act immediately. That way the recovery model will work. It's a great plan, and it would work fine if if its spine was straight, it could work well. Unfortunately, its spine is really crooked and it's missing a whole bunch of vertebrae. This is set up to basically, humans are there to create revenue for these non-governmental organizations or not-for-profits.
I caught up with Adam Zivo, the National Post columnist and the founder of the Canadian Centre for Responsible Drug Policy. I spoke to him about the Alberta Recovery Model, the differences between the recovery model here in Alberta and the model that we see in Ontario or in British Columbia, for example, and the current status of safe supply programs, because as he tells me, safe supply is not totally gone here in Alberta. It's just not being funded by the government.
In your opinion, has the Alberta Recovery Model been a success?
I mean, it appears to have been a success in that overdoses are declining, and they seem to be declining at a faster rate than comparable provinces, particularly British Columbia. And at the same time, we don't see taxpayer funding being used to enable addiction and to flood the streets with opioids like we have in British Columbia and Ontario. So on the whole, I think this more conservative approach seems to be working. At the same time, we do have to understand that some of the interventions that Alberta has planned, they're not fully implemented yet. So we should keep an eye out for how the Alberta model continues to develop and see if these promising preliminary results continue to hold.
Where did the safe supply model go wrong?
It went wrong because, I mean, it was horribly designed from the very beginning. And I'm going to give you a bit of context behind this. So the original research that was cited by safe supply advocates was for a different but related intervention called injectable opioid agonist therapy. And so what this was essentially was the use of pharmaceutical heroin administered under close supervision to help people who had very high opioid tolerances stabilize and eventually to titrate them onto more traditional addiction medications like methadone or Suboxone. And so the idea here is that if someone is severely addicted and they're not really reacting to other treatments, that this can eventually get them down to a level where you can get them on a more traditional treatment plan. Now, there were two trials that did this, the Salome and Naomi trials, and this I believe was in the early 2010s or late 2000s, and those showed promising results. But the important thing to remember here is, once again, this was done under tight supervision, and there were many, many additional supports that were provided to these patients, like housing supports, right? So the safe supply advocates took the evidence base here and said, okay, well, why don't we just give people bottles and bottles and bottles of hydromorphone, which is a pharmaceutical opioid, which is basically equivalent to heroin, with no supervision at all, with no real plan on how to get these people into regular treatments. And so that intervention was never really evidence-based. They kind of claimed that it was by really contorting the IOT model, but never really was. And the problem here is that the safer supply model never addressed the risk of diversion. Now, there's always been diversion for pharmaceutical opioids. That is not a new thing, but the scale of diversion here seems to be off the charts, right? And to give you a sense of how bad the problem is, in London, Ontario, after safer supply became widely available in 2020, the volume of hydromorphone pills being seized in that city increased by over 3,000%, from around 800 or 900 pills in 2019 to over 30,000 pills in 2023.
If you could you just sort of provide an overview of the Alberta model and the BC model as they are operating right now and where they differ?
Okay, so the Alberta model is recovery oriented. So the idea here is that you want to make treatment as available as possible so that people who want to get better can go into detox and treatment very easily. And they do actually offer their own version of safer supply, which is in line with the IOT system that I described earlier. They call it narcotic transition services, although they might have renamed it, who knows. But that was the name like a year or two ago. And so the idea here is that they give liquid hydromorphone to people who are severely addicted under tight supervision, so there's no diversion, with the clear goal of getting them onto methadone or Suboxone, right? So that is a responsible way of doing safer supply because it's supervised, it's not indefinite, there's a clear recovery-oriented goal. Now, what BC did, alternatively, was basically to say we're going to remove any barriers to drug use because their idea is that drug use is not inherently bad. And the BC NDP are never going to admit to that openly, but the policy advisors that they work with believe this. So, Bonnie Henry, who is the chief health officer, public health officer in BC, so she released this ridiculous report last year where she advocated for the full legalization of drugs, which she called, non-medical safer supply. And when you read through this, you can see all of the themes that you hear time and time again from the harm reduction activists in BC, talking about how it's actually stigma that's preventing people from going into treatment, how drugs are perfectly fine as long as they're regulated. It's really disgusting, actually. So In the BC model, their idea is that if you just remove the barriers to drugs, it'll be fine. Whereas in Alberta, they say if you remove the barriers to treatment, things will be fine. The one thing I really want to stress is that safer supply is not dead, right? So there are two different things to point out here. So first of all, at the federal level, yes, the federal government has defunded its safer supply programs. So these pilot programs are no longer operating, or they're no longer operating with federal funding. But we have to keep in mind that safer supply is something which is mostly done at the provincial level. Essentially, what you're doing is you're prescribing an opioid off-label like you would do with any other off-label medication, right? And so the federal government has not placed any restrictions on safer supply prescribing. And at the provincial level, we don't really see restrictions there either. So in BC, in response to the revelation that the provincial government is aware that diversion is a huge issue, they mandated witness consumption earlier this year. But the problem here is that witness consumption, these requirements are so full of loopholes in the BC system that it may as well be non-existent. So clinicians can keep people on unwitnessed consumption, for example, if they believe that there's a clinical reason to do so. And this is for the existing patients, right? Whereas new patients have to be on witness supply, like existing patients, if the clinicians say, well, we think they would benefit from still getting unwitnessed, then that's still fine. And so we still have a huge number of people who are getting unwitnessed safer supply in very large volumes every single day. And I know from my contacts who are in BC, including youth who were addicted to these diverted drugs, they don't see a difference in their communities. So it's still really bad. Now, in Ontario, which let's not forget, is 40% of Canada's population, we have no restrictions at all. And I really have to say that the Ford government has dropped the ball here, and I blame Doug Ford and his incompetence for allowing this to happen. Because in Ontario, safer supply is actually less regulated than it is in BC. So for example, in BC, you can technically get up to 14 hydromorphone pills, 8 milligram every single day. In Ontario, it's very normal to go up to 30 or 40. In Ontario, you don't have any attempts to mandate witness consumption, unlike in BC. Basically, Ontario is a wild, wild west, and this is where you see questionable actors coming up and setting up safer supply programs without federal funding because they know it's going to be very profitable for them, regardless if the feds give them a grant or not. Now, Ford has said that he opposes safer supply. He wrote a letter to the federal government last year where he tried to lay the blame on Trudeau. And he said, Trudeau, please stop funding these safe supply programs. We don't know how much hydromorphone is flooding into our communities because of them. Well, that's simply not true, because hydromorphone is dispensed through OHIP, which is Ontario's public health program, public funded health program. And so, you would be able to just talk to provincial stakeholders to understand where hydromorphone is being prescribed and in what volumes. So they should have that data, but they're pretending like they don't in order to blame Trudeau. And they're saying that Trudeau is responsible here, even though the provincial government has the ability to ban safer supply like they did in Alberta. So Ford is all talk, but no action here. And as a result, people are dying, and cities in Ontario are being reduced into narcotic hellholes because we have this pseudo-conservative in office.
I've spoken to journalists, people who work at recovery facilities, and addiction recovery doctors who even advised on the creation of the program. I've also let you hear from people who are on the street struggling. Of course, it's not really a surprise that they don't like the Alberta Recovery Model. That's not hugely surprising to me, but I think it's also early. It's early to see what might happen with this program. I also should say that the majority of the city on a Monday is absolutely beautiful. Very few homeless people that I could see. Some of them were in alleyways, and there obviously is a homelessness issue. There obviously is a drug overdose issue here. But we went specifically to the downtown east side, where there are homeless shelters, drop-in facilities, and other programs. So of course that's where they were all going to be. But I want to hear from you in the comments if you think the Alberta Recovery Model is the right approach for the entire country to take, and if this is the right moral approach for this problem. If you like this video and you want to see more content about the Alberta Recovery Model and about the drug and addiction crisis in our country, be sure to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share this video with your networks. Thank you all for watching.